Good afternoon.
No.
It's wonderful to be back with you in this beautiful space in this intimidating spot. There we go. Notes. All right. We have the slides.
They're behind you.
They're behind me. How convenient. Oh, there they are. Okay. So, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Nicholas, and for the past 4 years or so, I've served as the treasurer of the Diocese of Washington. Now, that title does not mean that I'm the volunteer CFO. That role is filled very ably by Canon Walter, assisted by his intrepid staff. So if I'm not keeping the books, what do I do? Well, one thing that I do is I sit on a lot of committees. These bodies, staffed by lay and clergy alike, bring specialized knowledge and a deep understanding of the Church to the stewardship of the diocese's earthly assets. So I thought we would start with a brisk walk through these groups. Let's start with the Finance Committee. One of its primary responsibilities is to assist in the preparation of the annual budget, which it recommends to the Council, who proposes it to you, for final adoption here at the Convention. Over the course of its monthly meetings, we monitor the progress against the budget and report that regularly to the Council. If a parish wishes to enter into a loan or a development deal or a sale agreement, the approval process starts with the Finance Committee, which often will question, propose, and even become directly engaged in order to ensure an optimal outcome. Once the committee is satisfied, it makes a recommendation to the Standing Committee for final approval. Members of the committee will also often support parishes facing acute challenges, either directly or through the Canon 54 process. The matters that come before this group are complex and often quite heartfelt, which is why we've been so grateful through the years for the thorough, insightful, and calm leadership of Steve Gibson, who has reached the end of his many years as our chair. You'll be hearing from Steve shortly, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to join me in expressing our community's profound gratitude for his many years of wise counsel and thoughtful leadership. While the Finance Committee is keeping an eye on the P&L and the balance sheet, the Investment Committee is monitoring our financial assets, which also include a great many of your financial assets through the investment pool. Now, these are all in the hands of professional managers, in keeping with the best practices of charitable institution governance. The Investment Committee meets quarterly with each of the two primary managers to discuss past performance and future outlook. Chair Ellen Martin brings deep experience in fund management to the table, while keeping the world's very best meeting notes. And these proved crucial in our successful negotiation in reducing management fees last year. The Audit Committee, which is an independent group led by Charles Lundelius, CPA, meets twice a year usually, once to go over the auditor's plan for reviewing our books, and again to review the audit itself. Now, an independent review is vital to our financial health at both the diocesan level and the parish levels. It also ensures we're keeping abreast of the evolving world of best practices, financial reporting standards, as well as local, state, and federal tax policies. So this is my annual pitch to make sure that your audits are up to date. Now, it's important to recognize that none of these groups has any independent authority to bind the diocese to grant or take out loans or to set policy. That authority resides with the Council, or in some cases the Standing Committee. The council meets monthly under the leadership of Ian Hudson. It asks questions, makes recommendations, and ultimately reaches its own judgments. Canon Walter and his team, under the supervision of the bishop, are charged with executing those final decisions. If you're at a stage in your parish where you're thinking, well, maybe we want to do this or take out a loan or enter into a partnership, it's very important to understand that there is a diocesan approval process, and none of the groups in that chain should be viewed as rubber stamps. Everybody's got an opinion. So these are the principal pillars of our financial stewardship. The staff and volunteers bring, by my not-so-scientific calculation, over 1,000 years of specialized experience in the essential tasks of gathering, protecting, monitoring, and growing diocesan assets. Now, even with all this experience, we can't predict the future or the movement of markets. Lord knows we make mistakes. But I think you can rest assured that what reasonable, honest, generous people can do to ensure our financial health for generations to come is being done by reasonable, honest, generous people. So what does the treasurer do in all this? The treasurer gets to work with all of them. So let's see what all this work that goes on. Okay, so one of the first things we always say is that the results I'm about to present to you for last year are preliminary results. We don't actually close the books until mid-March, and those books aren't audited until later in the year. So the first thing we always do is give you the final word on the 2021 results, which we discussed last year. And the final word is that after the audit, we received an unqualified opinion. That's the kind you want to get. That shows that our books are in order. Well, there we go. All credit to Andrew and his team. Okay, looking at the financial summary for 2022 as of now-ish, we are ending the year at 4.713 million in total revenue. That's slightly under our budget. That is, less than 1% under our projected budget. And I wish I could do forecasting that well in my day job. And as you can see, the total expenses, however, even though we were under budget on our revenue, we saved even more in our total expenses, and so we came through with a tiny positive balance and ended the year in the black, which is in a year that over the course of which economic conditions became increasingly more uncertain, is really a credit to Andrew and his team. So just a little more detail on how we got there. This is a more detailed look about our diocesan revenue. Now, one of the things we do with the budget is that we use various funds. The diocese has various permanent funds that contribute money. What we do is we take all that money and describe it as a source of revenue so that we run everything through the budget so that everybody can see it. So in some organizations, each of those individual funds will have their own budget. That's too complicated, and I don't like that. So we put it all here at the beginning. And so that's why when you look down that column, you'll see things like the SOPR Income Fund. So we take the money from there and put it into the general budget. Congregational giving was a little higher than we anticipated, for which we're very grateful. SOPR income, we didn't predict the market to the penny, the yield from that, but instead that yield is calculated on a 3-year rolling average at the beginning of the budget process. One thing to note as part of our due diligence and careful shepherding of our long-term assets is that we have gradually chosen to start reducing the annual draw on that fund. in order to ensure, which is especially important in an inflationary environment, to ensure that it can grow for future generations while supporting our current operations. The Lilly Endowment Grant is a set grant. The Court and Education Fund, as I said, we take money from funds and put it into the budget. We basically decided we didn't quite need to do that with these funds, and so they remain in the fund available for future use. The Bishop's annual appeal was a little shorter than we hoped, and interest and dividend income was on target. And then something about Lambeth, but we won't go into that. It's not important. Okay, so let's look at the expenses. You see here, all of these things, these variances really are tiny. We had a slight negative variance on diocesan ministries, an immaterial variance for the national and international ministries. Those are the things we kick up to the higher church. And then in administration, we had a positive variance. And most of that has to do with the timing of staff departures and hiring people, and when we budget the position to be filled, but if someone leaves, it's open for a few months, and that generates that positive income. So going to the next slide, we're back where we started. Total revenue, total expense with a tiny margin in the black. Let's take a look at the balance sheet. So just to remind you that the P&L, the statement of activities that we've just been looking at, is a cumulative view of what took place over the year. Sorry, I've jumped ahead. This slide, in addition to our operating activities, our annual accounts include non-operating revenues. Now, this is the change in the value of assets that are available for use at any time. I'll show you a pie chart at that later. So this isn't the total change in the diocese's assets. It's just a change of a particular piece of it. But because it's available for use at any time, those changes have to be reported as part of our annual results under accounting rules. So you can see that a realized gain and loss on investments, that's essentially stuff that we had that was less valuable when we sold it. And so we have to book that realized loss. The unrealized loss is when we looked at our statements and saw that things that we still owned were worth less than they were the last time we looked. And so that's the difference between the two. We're almost every year we have some realized losses, almost always, because we sell we sell the bad stuff. We're a charity. We support lots of worthy activities. The New York Stock Exchange is not one of them, and so if we have a bad stock, we get rid of it. And take the loss. And hopefully we're right about that. We aren't always. Okay, so that's that. Now we'll look at the balance sheet. This is what I was saying. The P&L is an accumulative collection over a period of time. The balance sheet is a moment in time of all your assets and liabilities. Now our actual balance sheet is ridiculously complicated, as actually is our P&L, and both of those are available to you in our annual audit report, which we post if you dare. So you can see that because this is an informal report, the dates of the two snapshots don't line up. That's not really important. What is important is that you can see that like you all know, the value of our assets significantly fell over the course of the last year. One other point that people always ask is, geez, what are those big liabilities? That's not really money that we owe to other people. It's money that we owe to your individual parishes. As many of you know, the diocese has an investment pool. All that money is sort of under our roof, and so that goes into the total asset figure. But we also recognize that about a fourth of it is money that we're simply holding on your behalf, and so that's booked as a liability. So that's what that big liability is. Okay, I mentioned earlier that we have a complex balance sheet, and it's made up of permanently restricted, temporarily restricted, and unrestricted funds. Now, what's the difference? A permanently restricted fund is when a donor gives you money and you accept it, and it says that you cannot touch the corpus, the body of the donation, but you can use the proceeds from the donation. And it's very important to recognize that those restrictions carry the weight of law. That if you ignore those restrictions, you can not only be sued by the donor, but the Attorney General can come after you as well. So those are very important, and we have to be very careful about that. And that's one of the reasons why our audit is very complicated and so important. Now, temporarily restricted funds are when a donor gives you a pool of cash and you accept it because it's a bilateral agreement, and instructs you to use it for a particular purpose. And so once you have used it, if you're fulfilling that purpose, you can theoretically spend it all. So some of our education funds are designated for education, and we could spend it all. You don't have to, but it's an option, but you can only spend it in that particular area. And again, those restrictions carry the weight of law. Our final pool is unrestricted funds. These are funds that are our own, that we can use as will, and when I mentioned earlier, it's the change on this pool that shows up in our annual results. So when we think about when you look at that big $114 million number, and even if you take out the number that's not really ours and you're still at 80, 90 million, and you think, wow, what a lot of money, you need to think about this pie chart. Because a lot of it is already segmented in ways that we have to abide by. And, oh, no, that comes later. All right, excellent. Okay, so our biggest sort of pool that we use to support directly the general operations of the diocese is the SOPR fund. It's very important to us. This is the fund that when I mentioned that we're trying to draw down the percentage that we draw, it's specifically related to this. As you can see, we began the year with $40 million, and we ended the year with 30. That's not very sustainable. But it's important to recognize that 8 million change is essentially unrealized gains or unrealized losses. And you'll recall, if you've been here for the last couple years, you'll recall that for several years we've been posting extraordinary gains on this fund, and the inevitable correction came. This includes the draw that we made of $1 to $2 million. And so some of that was cash withdrawal, but most of it was the change in market value. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much the numbers. Just a few final comments. One is your parochial report deadline is March 1st, as ever. Second is to remind you of your canonical responsibility to conduct an audit of your operations. And those audits are due to the diocese by September. If you don't have an auditor, if you think your auditor is too expensive, feel free to reach out to me or Andrew or Tim Vaughn or pretty much anyone at EDAL. We're all about the audit. And one final comment. So I mentioned how complicated. I showed you a little simple pie chart. Later in the year, Tuesday, February 28th, we're actually going to do a walkthrough of what is in that pie chart. What are all the different funds? What are all the different designations? How much is in the permanent and how much is in the temporary? And if you're interested in that, because it is something about which there's an astonishing amount of confusion based on what people say to me. So if you're at all interested in that, we'll be circulating the details about how to participate, and I'm sure it will be online. All right, that's all I have to say. Are we taking questions or not? No questions. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's helpful to have that as background information as we take up our conversations today and later as we go forward. We're going to take our lunch break now, 45 minutes for lunch, and soon I will call upon the Reverend Kim Turner Baker of St. Luke's, Washington.